My name is Paul. I'm a senior fellow here at the Melanie Heritage Center in Jerusalem. It's my great pleasure to welcome you in person or virtually to this event launching the new book by Melanie Phillips, The Bool of Sone, which we'll be hearing about shortly. How many Brits are there in the audience? A lot. Okay, a lot. There's a preponderance of Americans in these, amongst the Anglo scene in Jerusalem. So nice and great. So I assume that the Brits among you will agree with me that Melanie Phillips holds a particular place, I think, in British, Jewish, British pro-Israel circles, in that she, for many years, has been, I think, one of the voices, if not the main voice, that has never shied away from a fight, who has been in the most hostile of environments, by which I mean the BBC. Never afraid to speak out in support of Israel, never afraid to confront the established or accepted truths of the moment. I actually, when I remarked to a friend who I know sits on the opposite side to Melanie on a bunch of things, that I was doing this event, he said to me, the thing about Melanie Phillips is, even when you disagree with her, she forces you to ask questions. And I think that, in this day and age particularly, is a very important thing indeed. So, to her new book, The Bool of Sone, which we will hear about, there are a number of very nice tributes from eminent people, blurbs on the back of the book. One is by the noted historian Andrew Roberts, who, amongst other things, says, the October 7th attack on Israel presented the West with a choice between civilization and barbarism that challenged the West's faith. But this damaged society is far from lost if it takes its advice from an unexpected source. And we will hear exactly what that source is from Melanie. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce both Melanie and also our eminent interviewer, David Sone, whose book we've launched here a number of times. Most recently, his two compilations, Jewish Priorities and Young Zionist Voices, here in this room in the last few months of the last year. And we're very grateful to him for joining us, and also for the organisation which is associated with the Z3 project, for also being involved in this event. Okay, so let me introduce first Melanie Phillips, a British journalist, broadcaster and author who has championed traditional values of the cultural war for more than 3 decades. She writes a weekly column for The Times of London and the Jewish News Syndicate. She broadcasts on radio and TV and gives public presentations across the English-speaking world. Her new book, we'll hear about today, The Bool of Sone, How Jews and Christians Built the West and Why Only They Could Save It, is published by Wicked Sun. Her first novel, The Legacy, which deals with conflicted Jewish identity, anti-Semitism, and the power of history, was published in 2018, along with her personal political memoir, Guardian Angel. Her previous books include her 2006 bestseller, Londonistan, about the British establishment's capitulation to Islamist aggression, and The World Turned Upside Down, The Global Battle Over God, Truth and Power, published in 2010. Melanie Phillips. And she'll be speaking tonight with David Sone, an award-winning editor, translator, and author. He's also the director and Steinhardt Senior Fellow at the Z3 Institute. Z3 Institute, we would say. It doesn't work quite as well, but as we would say in the UK. His newest work, Young Zionist Voices, A New Generation Speaks Out, brings together the next generation of impassioned Jewish leaders. And prior to that, as I mentioned, his 2023 collection, Jewish Priorities, 65 proposals for the future of our people, brings together a remarkable read new essays from across the Jewish world. He's the former editor-in-chief of Azure and the founding editor of The Tower. He also wrote in 2010 The Ten Commandments, not the actual Ten Commandments, a book called The Ten Commandments. If he'd actually written The Ten Commandments, it'd be even more appropriate for this conversation. He wrote a book called The Ten Commandments, which was a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award. His translation of Uri by Yosef's The Angel was a winner of the National Jewish Book Award. He's also written 2 previous anthologies, Essential Essays on Judaism by Eliezer Berkowitz, and with Yoram Sone and Michael Oren, New Essays on Zionism. He has a PhD in Jewish philosophy from Hebrew University, he lives in Jerusalem, and we're very fortunate to have him with us.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you, those of you on Zoom, for participating this afternoon and this morning. And thanks to Paul and to the Z3 Project, which is based in Palo Alto, California. Let's dive in, shall we?
Why not?
Melanie,
Dave.
how is your book being received?
It's been received pretty well so far. I have yet to properly launch it in America. I'll be going to America in a few weeks' time to do various events. I've done some events in London and in Israel. I have done an extremely large number of podcasts, which is apparently what you have to do these days to sell a book. And they've gone extremely well. Interestingly, every podcast has taken a kind of different perspective, different line that interests that podcaster. And they've gone extremely well. The only slight hesitation in all of them came with one particular podcast with somebody that I really like a lot. His name is Winston Marshall. And his previous claim to fame was that he was the lead guitarist in a group called Mumford & Son. He then became a Christian and decided that everything he believed in, which was basically liberal leftist stuff, was wrong. He then found he was basically being cancelled by his group, and he departed and became a podcaster. So he was particularly interested to talk to me about religion, which is a key theme of the book, and he is a Christian. And I said to him that something had gone very badly wrong with the Christian church in Britain in particular, which had turned very badly against Israel and, in my view, against the Jewish people. And he said, I'm really, really distressed to hear that. You don't mean to include in that the Archbishop of Canterbury, do you? And I said, I absolutely include the Archbishop of Canterbury. And he sat back in his chair and said, with his hand on his heart, I'm so upset to hear that. And I thought he was going to cry. And I felt terrible. I thought, my goodness, what have I done to this poor man? But that was perhaps the only slight hesitation in all the podcasts that I did. The other thing that's perhaps of interest is that I did some speaking engagements in Australia. And I spoke in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. And in Brisbane, the local very energetic person who was organising the whole Jewish community from October the 7th to kind of, defend itself against this terrible onslaught that's happened against the Australian Jews, which is very, very violent, much more so, in fact, than in Britain, or I think most countries. She was turned down by 6 venues who said they would not host me. And she then found a cafe which was prepared to do that, but it only seated 130 people, and from her advanced ticket sales, she knew that she would need more tickets than that, more seats than that. So she found what seemed to be an ideal, larger venue in the Queensland Cricket Club. And the Queensland Cricket Club, when approached, said, on no account will we host anything to do with Jews or Israel. And that was such a thing, because it was the Queensland Cricket Club, that the incident made it into the columns of the Australian newspaper. I'm happy to say that I gave my presentation at the cafe with 130 people, and it was really great.
Nothing like cancellation to help promote a book. For the benefit of the audience, those who have not perhaps read it, why don't you perhaps begin with a kind of a survey of the book itself. What is your central thesis and its applications, especially for the Jewish world?
Well, I suppose my central thesis is that one can't understand the onslaught on Israel and the Jewish people from the West unless one understands that in the context of the fact that the West has been for decades mounting an onslaught upon itself. And that the two things are absolutely connected. For many years, I have charted as a journalist what I perceive to be the way in which the West, or to be more precise, the elites of the West, the intelligentsia, the cultural elites that run the society, political and cultural elites, universities and so on. I've been charting the way in which they had taken a wrecking ball, it seemed to me, to the core institutions of the West, on the basis that the West was basically born in the original sins of colonialism and racism, and that the Western nation state was the source of all bad things in the world, prejudice, bigotry, war, and that in order to achieve a better world, you had to basically, first of all, leapfrog the nation state and put your investment legitimacy instead in transnational institutions and laws such as international human rights law, the United Nations, the International Criminal Court, that kind of thing, because they embodied the brotherhood of man, and the brotherhood of man was good, whereas the nation state was the source of prejudice and division and war. And at the same time, you had to take, you had to basically dismember the core institutions of the Western society, which had made this corrupt civilization, and the core institutions that were then dismembered from, I would say, certainly the 1980s when I started writing about this, and I think it was well underway by then. The core institutions that were being dismembered were the education system as the method of transmitting a culture down through the generations. You couldn't do that anymore because the culture itself was so awful. The traditional family, which was a conspiracy against women, and basically men were a waste of space and were only good for basically rape and pillage, and that was about it. And the idea of the nation itself. And so I was charting these things. I was at the time writing for the Guardian newspaper. I worked for Guardian newspapers for the best part of 20 years. My former colleagues at the Guardian don't particularly care to hear me say this, but it is true that it is the Guardian that made me what I am today. But I was writing, about these things that I was thinking were, the destruction of these institutions. It seemed to me, after a while, that these weren't separate issues. They were all part of the same thing, that it was an attempt to undermine and destroy the West itself. I moved on to issues like multiculturalism and then Islamization and other things like that. I wasn't at the time speaking or writing about Israel or Jews. It wasn't part of my remit. I'd also never been to Israel, never wanted to go to Israel. I came to Israel the first time in the year 2000. Another story. And what then happened was that in recent years, I suppose just a few years ago, I realized that the two parts of my world, which was basically the part of my world which looks at Western civilization, and the part of my world which is the Jewish world, me as a Jew, were actually part of the same story. That the attack on Israel and Jews, and I'm speaking now about the past several decades, was intimately related to the attack from within of the West upon itself. Why? Because the attack within the West upon its core institutions were upon its foundational values. The attack was upon its foundational values. What are its foundational values? Well, people would say, well, Christianity is the foundational creed. Well, that's true, but Christianity didn't come from anywhere, from nowhere. I mean, Christianity was basically a Jewish sect that got out of hand. And the values that everybody in the West takes for granted as being absolutely essential, both religious people in the West and secular people, are fundamentally Jewish values. Values such as, conscience and compassion and building community and looking after each other, putting each other first, and the rule of law and justice and the distinction between right and wrong and taking personal responsibility for our actions. We invented all those things. And so it seemed to me that it was no coincidence, therefore, that if you had a Western world that had turned against its own core values, it was which were in fact the values of the Hebrew Bible, it wasn't exactly a coincidence that they had turned so viciously against the people associated with that Hebrew Bible, i.e. the Jews and the collective Jews of the State of Israel. And I thought furthermore, well, that's extremely interesting, because if I'm right that the West is going off the edge of the cultural cliff, well, what is the unique selling point of the Jewish people? It's cultural survival. We do cultural survival like nobody else has done cultural survival. We've outlived, as a people, every single culture that's tried to destroy us, who have themselves disappeared. So I thought to myself, maybe I should write a book which sets all this out, because people don't realize the extent to which it's Jewish values that underpin the West, and say, look, we can actually help. If the West wants to save itself, brackets, does it? I don't know. But if it does want to save itself, we can help, because we do cultural survival. We can show everybody else how to do it. And by the way, in addition to that, your core values are from us, so we can really help. So that's the point I got to on October the 6th, 2023. And I was already writing it. And then October 7th happened. And then October 8th happened. And then I watched what happened in response to October 7th in the West. And I realized something sort of quite quickly, that I had been writing about the West as having destroyed, basically, rationality, conscience, and justice within itself. And what was I seeing, what were we all seeing in the reaction, that terrible reaction in the West to October 7th, was the destruction of rationality, conscience, and justice. And I suddenly realized that everything I've been trying to write in this book was exemplified, like on steroids, by the reaction to October 7th. So I reframed the book to explain my analysis of why the West had gone so badly wrong and why it had turned against the Jews and Israel in the framework of October 7th and its reaction. And I also decided that I didn't want just to write a book saying, well, this is what's happened, this is why it's happened, it's all terrible, because I actually don't think that. I think, it's part of, living here. I actually feel tremendously optimistic, because I believe that Israel is going to survive and thrive and prosper, while in fact, you can't say that about the West. And so this sense of optimism inspired me to try to construct a rescue remedy for the West that we could all get behind. And so my last chapter is what I've called a kind of an appeal for what I call a kind of counter-cultural resistance movement, a coalition of people from every single grouping, culture, faith, non-faith, whatever, everyone from all those different disparate groups who wants the West to survive and who respects and understands the values of the West and where they come from, and is prepared to champion them. And to form a kind of coalition of the willing, as it were, to take back the culture, start to promote it properly, and to defend it. That's what the book's about.
So let's talk a little bit about the case of Israel, because before October 7th, we had the mass protests against judicial reform going on here. We also had not insignificant protests in favor of judicial reform. And I noticed something very strange, which was that it was the only clash of protest movements that I could recall in which both sides waved the national flag. And I actually wrote about this at the time, about how underneath it all there was some kind of a very profound commitment to the Jewish state, however interpreted and however perceived, that both sides felt a need to claim as their own. In your book, you write that Israel, and we all have seen the statistics of happiness, the happiness index of different countries, and you have the top 10 always have a whole lot of Scandinavia plus Israel stuck there in the middle. It's a country that, on the one hand, we have lots of kids compared to Western countries. We all serve in the military. Most of us are committed to defending this country. How does Israel play exactly? I mean, how do you envision Israel playing the role of Israel as the solution to the West's maladies exactly?
You mentioned the astounding birth rate. I think that is really so significant because I have thought for a long time that this birth rate in Israel, which bucks the trend of just about every developed country, I think, is because Israel knows what it is, loves what it is, and wants itself to continue. It wants to have children because it has faith in its own future. And not only does it have faith in its own future, it wants to have a future. And why does it want to have a future? Because it loves itself. It loves the Jewish people. The Jewish people love themselves. They love themselves as a people. They love what Judaism is. They love what the Jewish people are. This is people who may not be religious. They may be observant. They may not be observant. Not the issue. They all basically feel connected to a past which goes back a very, very, very long time. And they all feel that they are the inheritors of a past which is not just a long past. It is a past which is full of great things. And that they believe that Israel stands for these great things. And that's why they want it to continue. And it's so much the opposite of what the elites in the West have told themselves, that what their country, what their countries and what their culture stands for are just bad things. And if you believe that, then you don't want to have a future. So what can Israel show the West? Well, first of all, what it's showing the West is what the West doesn't want to hear. It's showing that if you actually want to survive, you have to fight. And that means that other people have to die. And those people who have to die are bad people because you are confident that you are good people and you are confident that you need, as a matter of morality, justice, and essential civilizational values, you have to defeat the bad people. Unfortunately, the West doesn't believe that anymore. It doesn't believe there's such a thing as good and bad. It thinks that everything's a matter of opinion. It thinks that everything is relative. It depends where you're standing, and all the rest of this nonsense. And the idea of, actually killing people is terrible because there is, how many times have I heard this in the last N months and before then? Nothing is ever solved by war. No conflict is ever solved by war. I mean, what? What did they think happened between 1939 and 1945? Are they completely mad? I mean, and you say to them, what do you think happened? And they say, well, that's different. Okay, right, that's different. But, but today, people die, and that's terrible. And, you know, and if we are civilized, if we're modern, if we're educated, we know that every conflict has to be solved by a negotiated compromise. I mean, this is like, you know, it is a fundamental orthodoxy. So, this is what Israel is telling the world, the West, and the West doesn't want to hear this. It says, this is terrible, they're killing people, this is dreadful. They should sit down and negotiate. And, you know, if it means that they have to surrender, I mean, who's talking about surrender? There's no such thing as victory. There's no such thing as surrender. Everything is a matter of negotiated settlement. So this is what Israel is telling the world. The world doesn't want to listen. Okay. The second thing Israel is telling the world, which it doesn't even understand, but it's being told, is that if you are going to have a country, a nation, that is determined to survive, then you have to make sure that the people in that nation today are inextricably attached to their past in order to have a future. And in order to be inextricably attached to their past, they have to have a sense of what they are and where they've come from, and to understand that what they are has been made by the things that have made them, which are religion, law, institutions, shared history, and all the rest of it. And you have to teach your children all those things, not simply by prioritizing education in the formal sense, but by celebrating and memorializing your culture. So you celebrate its achievements. You memorialize its losses. The memorialization is as important as the celebration. Both are important. But it was Napoleon who said, watching the Jews weeping on the floor on Tisha B'Av, said something to the effect of, a people that is still weeping over the loss of its country 2,000 years later is a people that's going to survive. And that's the point. And you look at the West, and it's like, it's so ashamed of itself. It wouldn't dream of, you know, celebrating its victories, because there's something kind of indecent about its victories, it thinks it's to itself, because its victories are all at the expense of other people. So it can't celebrate its victories. And it certainly doesn't memorialize. I mean, to a certain extent it celebrates, and to a certain extent it memorializes, but nothing like what the Jewish people do, and nothing like what Israel does. So I would say that's the most important thing culturally that Israel has to show, that, you know, to be a nation with the expectation of survival, you have to be attached to your past, and you have to defend your existence by defeating your enemies.
So, taking from Israel, well, let's speak perhaps about the American context, which I'm a little bit more familiar with than with the British context, for example. In your book, you refer back to religion frequently. You mentioned the West is essentially created as a Christian civilization, and that Christianity is essentially created as a Jewish, as you said, spin-off. But I kept thinking to myself two things. First of all, Israel isn't such a religious country. We have a fairly robust secular society, secular population. The country was essentially founded by a secular movement that was that managed to borrow a little bit from Marx as well. And even when Ben-Gurion insisted on Bible study as a way of connecting to the past, it was nonetheless a secular, nationalistic approach rather than a specifically religious approach. I'm obviously overgeneralizing. And I keep thinking to myself, what the thing that you're really focusing on with Israel is a national identity and a national continuity more than faith. Whereas when you talk about the West more broadly, it's actually faith that you keep going back to rather than, you know, and I grew up in Boston. Boston is a very interesting city because on the one hand it's politically very liberal, but on the other hand it takes pride in being the cradle of the American Revolution. So there is a tremendous amount of awareness of American history and reverence for the battles of Lexington and Concord and Faneuil Hall and Paul Revere's Ride, and all of these things are celebrated, at least they were when I was in high school. But it feels much more like this sort of secular nationalistic pride than faith per se. What do you think Western countries should focus on? Because frankly, if I'm talking to a secular, non-faithful person, arguing that you need to be a religious person and raise a religious family, not because you believe in it, but because that's what's good for the West, seems to be a bit of a tall order.
Very much so, and I'm certainly not saying that. I say explicitly in the book that I realise that the first mention of religion will send people, screaming from the book and throw around the room in fury. And I'm certainly not saying that people who are secular, i.e. not religious, should become religious. And I'm certainly not saying that people who are not Jews should become Jews. What I'm saying is that what I would like people to understand is, and agree with, is that the values that everybody holds dear, whether secular or religious, in the West, are fundamentally religious values, and that if you try to evacuate them of their religious origins or characteristic, you destroy them completely. I mean, I've been told by lots of people, well, okay, so all right, they were in the Bible originally, but so what? We've got them now, and so things like respecting other people as people, we just know that now. Well, no, actually, because if you don't actually anchor your culture in those principles, and if you tell yourself that actually, there is nothing there that we kind of that these are kind of free-floating principles, they kind of vanish because there's nothing to anchor them. So I'm certainly not saying people should become religious. You're absolutely right that Israel is in many respects a secular country. I mean, as you know better than I'm sure. Right at the beginning, the founding fathers of Israel, there was this great division. Was Israel the realization of Judaism as a religious experience, as a set of religious aspirations, that it was, it was the redemption of the Jewish people, i.e. it was the flowering of a religious perspective, or was it the creation of the new Jew, who would have nothing to do with religion, would be entirely secular, and wouldn't be so much a Jew as an Israeli? And this tension, I think, obtains today. I mean, it's never been resolved. So, it's not a theocracy, but it is infused with values that come from the religious part of Judaism. The calendar. I never cease to be amazed, because I was born and bred and lived for most of my life in Britain. And the calendar is a Jewish calendar. It's not an Israeli calendar. It's a Jewish calendar. And even secular people in Tel Aviv, so I'm told, they're not observant. They don't do the stuff that religious people will do or would expect to be done on festivals. But they observe the festivals. They mean something to them. And to a certain extent, they're increasingly doing that. What do we hear on Shavuot? They do Leil Tikkun in their own kind of way. Okay, so it's not what observant people would do, but nevertheless, it is a thing to do with that festival. So I would say that actually even secular culture here is infused with Judaism. But this idea of religion as faith, which you refer to, now, I was told roundly, not that long ago, that I had an entirely erroneous, I was told this by a rabbi, and I've heard it subsequently from other rabbis, that I had an entirely erroneous idea of religion, and it was indeed a Christian view of religion that I had. This was all because I said something like, it would be nice to find a rational reason for faith. And I was shouted at on the basis that we Jews don't talk about faith. This is a Christian thing. We don't do creed, we don't do dogma, we don't do belief. We do doing. To which I said, well, okay, we do doing, but the doing is based in belief. And the answer was, well, yes and no. Yes, of course it is, but that's not where we're at. When we talk about Judaism, we're not talking about, faith in the way that Christians talk about it. We're talking about a way of life in which we elevate ourselves, or try to elevate ourselves and the society we're living in by good deeds. And okay, you wouldn't have that were it not for the fact that it was founded in faith, which is why if you get rid of the faith bit completely and try to replace it by entirely secular ideologies, you get rid of the good stuff. But we just get on and do it. And that was quite a revelation to me, actually, that we're all talking complete cross purposes. And so when people, I hope that people read the book, they will see that I'm not saying people should become religious at all. I'm saying something quite different. I'm saying that in my notional coalition of the counter-cultural revolution, coalition of people who want the West to survive, I'm saying explicitly people of faith and no faith. Because I've met loads of people who are describing themselves as secular, agnostic, atheist, but these people all say, we understand absolutely that if you evacuate the society that we're living in of its grounding in biblical values, it falls apart as a civilized society. We understand that, and we're going to fight for those values. It doesn't mean they're going to become, doesn't mean that they want everyone to become religious. It means instead that, for example, I put in words in their mouth, this is what I'm thinking. For example, it's an article of faith, if I can abuse that term, in the secular West, that all good things come from universal human rights. Now, in my book, universal human rights, far from producing all good things, has produced terrible things. Why? Because rights, if you have kind of free-floating rights which are devised by human beings and enshrined in laws and administered by judges who choose between competing rights, basically what you're talking about is a set of demands. And if you have a society based on demands, you have a society which really is asking for trouble because there's no end to the demands that people will make, and demands inevitably and inexorably divide people from each other. So far from building a society which is a community, which everyone pulls together for the common good, you have groups fighting each other for the realization of their rights, which is precisely where we've got to. Now, that ideology of rights is very explicitly a secular set of principles, and it is inimical to Jewish values, because Jewish values, as I understand them, are based on are based fundamentally on the idea of duty and responsibility. So, I have a duty to be careful about your integrity as a human being. You don't have the right to expect me to do that. I have a duty. So unless you have duties, then you have no rights. So it makes it incoherent. So that's what I'm saying. That, if we understand that our core values come from a body of principles in the Hebrew Bible, mediated through Christianity, but in the Hebrew Bible, then we have to go back to those principles, and we have to say, we can't have a society based on rights anymore like this. We can't have a demand-led society. We have to get back to the idea of personal responsibility and responsibility for each other. Okay, how do we do that? That's another matter. That's, it's a difficult, practical question. But that's what I'm getting at. You don't have to have faith to understand that. You have just to see what's happened.
So, if I were that rabbi, if I just maybe even propose a bridging terminology, I would say that it's neither faith nor doing that you're looking for. What you're looking for is the word memory. Because the Bible is a record, and the Bible has its own instruction manual inside the Bible, which says, remember. Remember what you've been through, remember what you've seen, remember who went against you. And so the commandment of memory that you see played out in all of these holidays and all of these observances is explicit. And it's also the thing that provides health, not just to the state of Israel, but to all the Western societies that you're talking about, is remember where you come from, remember what you've been through, remember what you had to do in order to achieve success. And don't do things that will cut yourself off collectively from your own memories, which is, I think, something that you constantly are targeting. You mentioned the 1619 Project in the United States as a way of undoing collective memory, and certainly many things we've seen in the U.S., whether it's in college or school curricula, whether it's taking down statues and renaming in order to erase the memories of, however flawed. I would like to focus, perhaps, for this last section, and then afterwards maybe we'll open it up to questions. I've been spending a lot of my time thinking about the state of the Jewish people. Part of what the Z3 Project is about is sort of, especially after October 7th, kind of rethinking and challenging some of the fundamental strategies of survival that Jews in the diaspora have used that have now been called into question in the wake of October 7th. So while I was reading the book, I kept coming back to questions surrounding Jewish survival rather than that of the state of Israel specifically. As you well know, many Jewish readers will not necessarily immediately side with you. They've been investing many generations in a survival strategy that essentially aligned themselves with the very forces that you're criticizing as inimical to the future of the West. At the same time, in the wake of October 7th, many Jews, without necessarily wanting to become observant, but many Jews felt very betrayed by the progressive movements that they had committed themselves to, by specific forces within those progressive movements that they felt completely stabbed in the back by. And my sense is that there's a kind of a searching process going on now. They don't want to go over to the dark side, God forbid, but they do want to find a path that allows them to stay connected with Israel. In many cases, there are even statistics, studies that have been done since October 7th, that suggest in America a fundamental, what they're calling the surge, a fundamental shift in the direction of Jewish engagement, measured in different ways, whether it's through synagogue attendance or learning experiences and so forth. What do you say to a Western secular or reform or in the UK liberal Jew who's reading your book and saying, okay, what does this mean for my life? How should Jews around the world respond to your book?
Well, first of all, I think you're entirely right that there is this shock on the liberal side in the Jewish world that's been going on. In a way, it's a more tragic sad state of affairs even than, you know, the non-progressive Jews who are so horrified by what's been coming at them and what they've seen and heard in terms of the West's reaction to October 7th. Because the progressive Jews, as you say, you know, they are, they can't, they can't deal with it. They can't process it. They haven't got the wherewithal. I don't mean that to sound pejorative or patronising, but it's thrown everything that they thought out the window because. In my view, and you know, I used to be very closely associated with people who think like that, and I know that, you know, I know what happened to me when this discombobulation and shock, you cannot believe it, when your deepest assumptions about what everyone thinks and thought, and how right that is, are thrown absolutely upside down. You cannot believe it's wrong. So you have to find ways of trying to make it right in your mind. And that's taken some people on the left into a really horrible place. In order to make it right in their mind, they deny what was in front of their eyes. So, you know, you've seen this horrible business of, you know, feminists, you know, who are sort of Me Too feminists, who are silent, have been silent all this time about the rapes of the women in Israel. They can't process it because, you know, as far as they're concerned, you know, the people who did the rapes are the people they have supported as holy victims. I mean holy, H-O-L-Y, victims. And the people who were being raped are people they've associated with being oppressors. And if they actually accept that it's the other way around, then they feel their whole moral personality is about to be smashed. By which I mean, they will become, and don't laugh, they will become right-wing. By which they mean, they will become bad and evil people who have no conscience, who are selfish, who are self-centered, who are rapacious. Everything is bad in the world. That's what it means to go down that road. And I know that's how they think, or some of them. Because I was like that once, and you know, all my colleagues were like that. And so how does one help people like that? And it is very, very difficult if you're dealing with people who have, to use the fashionable word, binary sense of good and evil. You know, you're on one side or you're on the other side. You can't have any kind of nuance. You can't have two conflicting thoughts in your head at the same time. You can't do complexity. What do you do with this kind of person? And now there are some people who will not go down this road at all. They are so completely they make themselves impervious to facts and reality and reason because they can't allow themselves to do this. But there are others, as you say, who are kind of on a path. Now, in the Jewish world, and I think it's particularly true in America, but you know much more about than I do, it's particularly difficult because so many Jews in America have espoused, espoused, I would say, left-wing, liberal, as they would call it, values, which they have told themselves are Jewish values, but actually are, in my view, inimical to Jewish values. So I think that all one can do is, well, first of all, we should stop shouting at each other, and you know, there should be no insults. You know, one should accept that there are people of goodwill and high ideals who are all trying to find a good path in the world. And the fact that I or you may think that those people have got it terribly wrong doesn't mean that they are bad people. It means that they have just taken a terribly, tragically wrong path. And so I think that one can possibly, and I'm being very tentative because I really don't know the answer to your question, but I think one can possibly nudge people like that, if they're willing even to engage, and many of them will not engage, but if they're willing to engage, then you can nudge people along this road by saying, look, with the best will in the world, we collectively in the West have thought that a number of assumptions were the way to make a better society, to make people happier, live more fulfilled lives, overcome prejudice, and all those things. But, you look at the reality of what we are facing or what our world is, and we have record numbers of people who are desperately unhappy, psychologically disturbed, record numbers of young people who have a variety of mental disorders, psychological disorders, and record amounts of suicide attempts and so on. And we also have people who are, they're going down the path of superstitious mumbo jumbo. We're supposed to be living in a world which, has got rid of God because we're so rational. And one of the fastest growing things in the West at the moment is witchcraft. It's fantastically popular. There are dozens and dozens of witchcraft apps you can get, apparently. Like, what's going on here? So, in other words, one can appeal to people's sense of self-effort, altruism. We need to make this better. This is not good. This is not, we're not being rational. We are not being compassionate. We're not, we're abandoning our children to whatever. And you start going down that road, and then you start unpicking what's behind all this. Perhaps that's the way to do it. And in terms of the Jewish bit, you've got to have Jewish leaders who are stepping up to the plate here. Where are they? Well, I think there are a couple in America. I won't name names, but there are a couple of conservative stroke reform rabbis who get it. Or they get part of it. They get it that they are saying in public, in terms, we did this, we've done this. What they're not saying is, and therefore, we should do this. They haven't got to that point yet. But they're saying, we've done this. We have brought this upon ourselves. And I'm interested to have that conversation with them, if I will, in America. So there are a couple of people starting to do that. Because I think that, ultimately, most people are good. And, most people who've gone down these terrible paths, and indeed worse, people who do terrible things, they're often motivated by very high ideals. Unfortunately, the ideals are not anchored in something which is basically good and wholesome. Then they go very badly wrong, which is what has happened to the secular world. So I think it's kind of, one has to be careful and gentle but firm, and you have to stick to the red lines. You can't say, well, we can sort of give ground here, we can give ground there. You have to actually decide what the actually important red lines are, and then stick to them in any discussions that you have. Inadequate answer, I'm afraid, but let's have a bit.
But one more little thing before we go to questions from the audience. I want to draw attention to the cover. Did you choose that photograph of the archaeological inscription?
No.
Because it actually captures much of what you're saying. I know this because when I promoted this event, somebody on Facebook asked me what that inscription was. So I did what... Well, I didn't get that far because I didn't have the book in front of me. Instead, I did what you do today, which is to upload the image to Google and ask Google what it is.
It's on page 0001.
But what I learned was that this is actually the first archaeological appearance of Jerusalem, of Yerushalayim. It says Lechanania Dodanos, something like that. His last name is lost in time.
Hananiah, son of Dudalos of Jerusalem.
Okay, of Yerushalayim, of Jerusalem. And what's amazing is that in this one image, whoever chose it, you capture both your passion for memory, for our national heritage, but also for science. Because this is a fact. This is an archaeological piece. It's something that the sort of biblical archaeology for 100 years has been looking for extra biblical evidence that affirms our own memories.
Right.
And it's a really beautiful encapsulation. I just wanted to say that.
I can't take any credit for it. All the kudos should go to my publisher, Wicked Son, Adam Bella, and his picture researcher.
Thank you so much. Now we'll take questions.
Okay. I see the mic has been grabbed. Okay. just for initiative, you get the first question.
It was received, not pressed.
Go for it.
Melanie, could you perhaps simulate a dialogue between the good sense that you're talking and someone that you are engaging who took the wrong path? What would that dialogue sound like?
So I think a dialogue between myself and...
Between yourself, with the sense that you're presenting us, and someone who took the wrong path. What would a conversation sound like between those two people, yourself and that person?
A dialogue between myself and someone who took the wrong path. It depends what path you mean. What sort of path?
The path you described.
You mean, just to clarify, you're talking about the people the Jews who went down the progressive route and abandoned the Jewish values that he's talking
Those
about?
for whom facts no longer matter, and those who can distort or reframe the facts in the dialogue to fit the values to which they're attached and refuse to let go and are threatened by letting go.
Okay, people who are threatened and won't let go of the values that they have. Well, I have to break it to you, those people will never talk to me. I think I would start by saying hello. Well, lovely to meet you. It's been too long. Can we have a, I'd just love to know what you think. And I would ask that person what they think. And then we would take it from there. I would say, that's a jolly interesting thing you just said. Could you explain that a bit more to me? What do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? But don't you think this? And possibly that. Have you thought about that? I know that sort of conversation. It'd be lovely to have that sort of conversation. But they won't come near me.
Okay. Well, I want to get to more questions. Okay. Sorry, Eli, you're going to go right to the top. The gentleman there with his hand up. Yeah.
Good evening. Hi, Melanie. Thanks for the clarity with which you put your argument. I think it's a pleasure to hear it in such a way. It's a pleasure to hear it in such clarity, and I congratulate you on it, and I'll certainly be buying the book, never mind its cover. What occurred to me when you were expounding what you were saying, and that that the fundamental values and everything, and then the explosion of anti-Semitism with it, it seems to me that historically, and you said we should remember everything that's gone on, it seems to me that it's just an explosion of anti-Semitism, and they've now got something to hang the hat on with it. We've always been the same, and thinking about what you said about the people that you work with on The Guardian, and that they couldn't change anything. I mean, just imagine that they were supporting the Jews.
Sorry, what's the question?
The question is it just, it's okay. Is it just simply anti-Semitism?
Is it just simply
rather than anything else?
Well, Anti-Semitism is always simply anti-Semitism. And, you know, it's always with us and always has been and always will be. But nevertheless, that doesn't seem to me to be a very helpful way of trying to work out how on earth we deal with this current outbreak of it. Because anti-Semitism is always with us. It's true, and we all know, you know, the basic characteristics of it. We hardly need to explain it. But it takes different forms in different generations, and it takes it has different expressions in different contexts. First of all, you know, I think we need to understand the relationship between what's called anti-Zionism or anti-Israelism and anti-Semitism. We have to be very clear in our minds that how the two are connected and why they're connected. In order to help deal with it at a practical, everyday level, just by explaining to people why what's going on is as wrong as it is. But I think when you say it's just anti-Semitism, I would say, yeah, we've all been here before, we kind of all know what this is, but it seems to me this is qualitatively and quantitatively different from anything that we have had in our recent collective memory because of its scale and because of what it seems to me to represent. Because we all know that anti-Semitism, you know, that we are the canaries in the mine. We all know that anti-Semitism is a kind of warning of a society that's going down, that's in trouble. And it seems to me that, you know, in this outbreak across the West of anti-Semitism, we are seeing the signal that it's giving is of the West that's going down. And I think, therefore, it's something that's rather different. What we're looking at, I mean, I know this sounds apocalyptic, but I'm, you know, not known for being not apocalyptic. But I think what we're looking at is a civilization that's going down. It's not just anti-Semitism. This is something much bigger. You know, it is going down. I don't think it has to go down, that's why I read the book. I think it can actually put itself back from the brink. The first thing it has to do to put itself back from the brink is to realise it's on the brink, which it doesn't realise at all, to a large extent. But I think that, you know, as I said earlier, I don't think I said earlier, I don't think we can understand the onslaught on the Jews unless we understand it's the onslaught the West has made upon itself. And I don't think that we can expect diaspora Jews to become reasonably safe again unless the West decides to save itself. And if it doesn't, if it goes down, then the Jews in diaspora are in a very, very powerless position because they're going to get it from all sides. I think Israel is in a completely different situation. We are fighting for our existence and everything that we believe in, and we will survive and we will thrive, we will win this, because we know what we're up against. We are armed in every sense, militarily, culturally, spiritually. So we're going to win this. We have no alternative, but the West isn't. And this is pulling itself together. So when you say it's just anti-Semitism, I know exactly what you mean. And yes, at the root, it is just anti-Semitism. We can't just leave it there. I think we, first of all, need to understand for ourselves what's going on. We need to understand what's going on in order to try to explain to ourselves what's going on. But also, I think, as I said in the book also, Jews need to behave quite differently now, in my view. We have a duty. We've always understood our duty to be truth tellers to the world. And I think we have not actually been doing that in many respects. Jews in the diaspora tend to, variously keep their heads down, look after themselves, assume that, as you say, it's just anti-Semitism, it will all go away again, it'll be okay in the end, we'll find a way through this, we've been through this before. I think in these circumstances, no, I think we have a duty to actually tell the world what they are doing, what is happening to their world, what is happening to the West, and what we think should be done about it. And the Jews of the diaspora have not done that. I mean, since October 7, it is astounding to me that in Britain, the country that of course I know best, the Jewish leadership in Britain has never, in the last terrible 17, 18 months, stood up and told Britain and the West of the terrible errors it is making. It stands up from time to time and protests against a particularly egregious offence by the BBC or a particularly benighted failure of the police to ensure the safety of Jews in the streets of London. But it doesn't actually say what needs to be said. For example, that the West generally, including the British government, is fueling this madness by saying things that are completely untrue. It is the fact that everything that Israel does is entirely in accordance with international law. It is a fact that the Jews are the only people who have any kind of historical or legal right to the entire land. It is a fact there is no such thing as the Palestinian people. It is a fact that concept was invented in the 1960s in order to fry the brains of the credulous West, which has been done to the letter, and stuff like that. It is a fact that anti-Semitism is rampant in the Islamic world, including the Muslim communities of this country, Britain. They have never said that. They don't say it. They won't say it. They need to say it. People need to hear it. Once these truths are out there, I really deeply believe this. Once these truths are out there, this whole discourse changes or would change. And it's not being done. Now, we Jews collectively have a duty to do this. We know what this is. We should know what this is. Too many of us don't know what it is. We should know what it is. Enough of us do know what it is. We should start taking the fight to the enemy. We should start standing up for truth and justice and saying.
There's a lot of questions, but I think we'll just take a couple more. That's what we do now. Okay. And then we'll go outside to buy books, right? So the lady here with her hand up, yes. Hila Shana. Yes. Wait a sec, wait for the mic.
Personally, I'd love to thank you, Melanie, for your tireless efforts for Jewish survival. You all for your very clear voice of moral clarity, which is so missing in the world today. I want to ask you if you have ever heard an explanation from the progressive left intellectuals. They abhor the nation state. They think it is the root of all evil, as you have said. And yet, when it comes to support a Palestinian state, that goes out the window. Have you heard an explanation for this contradiction? Or is it just don't confuse me with the facts? What is it?
Well, you have to understand that the Palestinian people, as they would describe it, as they would describe them, are the oppressed of the world, and the oppressed of the world doesn't have a Western nation state. It is the Western nation state that is the source of evil. The Palestinian people simply need to assert themselves against the Western nation state, and that means that they have the right to, how would they phrase it, be a state. What? Resist by any means necessary, yes. I'm just thinking how they would describe, the putative state of Palestine that they all basically want to happen. They don't see it as a nation state. They don't really care about the Palestinian nation state at all. What they care about is the destruction of the Jewish state. And so, you know, they were kind of back the question away. They, you know, it's like irrelevant, like, what, this is like nonsense. We all know what the problem is. The problem is the existence of Israel. That's the problem. That's how they would see it, even if they don't actually say that, but that's what they think. Because none of it makes sense. I mean, none of it makes sense at all. All their positions are entirely contradictory. Because it's what they're against, you see, it's not what they're for. You know, if they had an ounce of the compassion that they purport to have for the oppressed Palestinian people, they would be out on the streets every day campaigning and protesting against the Hamas and against the Palestinian Authority for the tyrannical and oppressive way in which they keep their congregations, their populations down. Of course, they don't do that. They quite clearly don't care about the people they purport to care about. What they care about is smashing down the people that they want to see obliterated, which includes, I'm afraid, Israel and the institutions of the West.
Okay, last question, lady here. And afterwards, Melanie will be around for you to ask your questions too, and also, of course, be outside to sign books. Yeah.
Melanie, thank you. You're brilliant. You're wonderful. We love you. I just love the word that you keep talking about spelling out truth. But it seems to me, both in the Jewish community and indeed the Christian community, that we're incapable of saying something is actually wrong or evil. And I just wanted to get your reaction to that.
Well, as you know, every person who has any kind of education knows for a fact there is no such thing as objective truth. That was abolished, thank goodness, several decades ago. So if I were to say to my progressive friend, but this is true, and that's not true, and I've had these conversations, I can tell you what the answer is. But that's just your opinion. Or as Oprah Winfrey famously said to Meghan Markle, it's your truth. And of course this is absolutely pernicious, because if there is no such thing as truth, there is no such thing as a lie. If everything is a matter of opinion, then you're quite likely to accept lies as truth, and truth as lies, and that's exactly what's happened. It's certainly what's happened in the West's perception of the Middle East, and it's happened all over. My experience is you cannot have that discussion. You cannot even get off the starting block, because the idea that you are articulating a truth is simply not accepted. And if you were to insist upon it, you would be regarded as somebody who basically doesn't have much intelligence. Because all sophisticated people know that objective truth is something which only the credulous believe.
Okay. I want to thank firstly David Kazoni for a superlative work. And of course, Melanie Phillips for writing the book, for making us think, and helping us to think, and for fighting the good fight. So thank you, Melanie. Thank you, everyone, for coming. The book is made outside to buy. Melanie will be signing. It's also it's being sold outside by our good friends at Pomerantz. You can also go to the store in Jerusalem. And for those outside Israel, you can order it on Amazon and buy it in good bookstores everywhere. Bye.